Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time to see what's making the headlines then with the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the PR consultant Alex Deane. Super to see both of you. With us from now to midnight, I should have said as well. Anyway, to the front pages, let us kick off with The Sun. It leads with the BBC's apology to the parents at the centre of the Hugh Edwards scandal. The Daily Telegraph leads on the UK blocking a French bid to send NATO troops to Ukraine. Indefensible, says the Daily Mail, as it's reported the government doesn't plan to increase defence spending. The Eye newspaper splashing on Labour failing to win over some 40% of voters. The FT says that Thames Water wants to increase bills, face fewer fines and enjoy higher dividends. The Guardian reporting on the woman who says the Conservatives don't take sexual assault seriously. The Metro revealing the Chancellor's plan to increase the price of a 20 cigarette pack to £16 in a bid to combat smoking and vaping. Well, don't forget, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch our guests. So let's head to Jenny and Alex. Right mix of stories there. On the day we hear there may well be another by-election headache, possibly for the Conservatives. The Eye is leading on Labour not yet convincing the electorate. 40% of target voters, Alex, I found.
Yeah, and this is reflective of the panel that Sky has put together of people who voted Conservative in 2019, who would, broadly speaking, fall into the target voters that Labour needs to reach out to. People who voted for Boris but would be thinking about or potentially willing to vote Labour. And the poll that the Eye shows us from YouGov suggests that not a majority, but a good chunk of them are not yet convinced. And one of the interesting things about that is it may feel strange for us as politicos, but the traditional change of government in this country is made by direct switching. People who go from one of the main parties to the other one. Right? And so for all the excitement we often see about a third party coming into new heights and so forth, the main thing that determines elections in this country historically is people going Tory to Labour, Labour to Tory. Yeah.
And the Lee Anderson affair and reform is part of that mix of, you know, the third party coming in there. But this is fascinating, isn't it? You've talked in the past about Labour, you know, having to go electorally small,
sure,
so they don't take flack and they don't get noticed.
Yeah.
Harry Cole, political editor of The Sun, talked about carrying a Ming vase over a minefield, which is what the next year is going to be for Labour. But does it matter that they're not convincing everybody? They just need to convince the right number of people.
Well, yes, and what this is not suggesting is that the Tories are in any way securing that 40%. I mean, this has been, you know, the Tory support among these blocs has collapsed. These blocs identified as the patriotic left, Workington man, the disillusioned suburbans, or Stevenage woman. I mean, God, these pollsters, where do they come up with all of this? But, you know, it's not like these people are saying, yes, I'm going to vote Tory, or even that I'm going to hold my nose and vote Tory. They're not going to vote Tory. They're not enthusiastically embracing Labour. And I think, you know, the real problem that the Labour Party will have over the next few months is a sense of complacency. Because the polls show them so far ahead, any sense that they've got this, that this is licked, there is a sense, I think, in the wider country that the Conservatives are not going to win, but whether or not Labour is going to win and win conclusively enough either to have a majority or to have a workable majority in Parliament that will allow them to put anything through is another matter.
Yeah, but it's interesting. The person who was responding on the Sky panel who said, you know, Keir Starmer, I don't really think of him as a future Prime Minister. He's just sort of there. I think that reflects a lot of what people think, as reflected in this poll. Support for Labour isn't really... It's widespread but shallow. There's no real depth to the idea that, you know, there aren't real passionate Starmerites out there saying Keir Starmer's my man in a way that they did, for whatever you think of him. Some did for Corbyn, nowhere near enough in the electorate, but some did. Lots of people did for Tony Blair, enough to form a complete majority. Yeah. And, like him or not, people really did for Boris Johnson.
Yes, yeah, so are we seeing anti-votes? So 2019, you know, was it actually anti-Corbyn as much as it was pro-Boris Johnson?
I think a lot of 2019 is presented as a sort of giant storming endorsement of Boris Johnson.
And Brexit.
It was actually also, for a lot of people, it was people who said, I cannot vote for Jeremy Corbyn. I'm a left-wing person. I would count myself a Labour voter, but not if that's what Labour is. So you have to see that election result as a combination of both enthusiasm for Boris Johnson and complete dislike for Jeremy Corbyn. There are lots of people who really did like him, but there were a lot of people who would have voted Labour who felt, I cannot vote for Labour with him in charge.
It's easy to underestimate the extent to which the environment has changed between the last election and this one. The predominant factors in the last election were basically BBC. Boris, Brexit, Corbyn, all gone.
Fascinating. Anyway, just a quick run through the Guardian front page before we move on to the Post Office, Jenny. Tories putting party before sexual assault claim, says an alleged victim. So
yes, I mean, as you would imagine, there aren't many specifics in this story, but there is an alleged victim of what the Guardian is calling a serious sexual assault by a Conservative MP, have spoken to Pippa Crerar of this studio.
This parish, yeah.
Who has said that there was very little will to investigate, that the party was more concerned with protecting its own reputation than formally investigating or looking after her welfare, even though her mental health deteriorated to such an extent that they did spend £15,000 on private treatment for her at a hospital. But she's saying, she's spoken to The Guardian saying that no other organisation would take no action if an individual came to them with an issue like this.
If you are the victim of a serious assault, as this made out in this piece, or even if you know about someone who has been, the right thing to do is to go to the police. And the police have made it clear in post Sir Richard Enriquez inquiry that whilst they don't automatically assume that they're going to believe the person who brings a complaint to them, because the presumption of innocence still applies in this country, they take things seriously and they'll investigate something. The thing that a party dreads the most is being seen as covering something up, and that's why I think the risk for any party trying to deal with something internally, if something like this came to a party that I was involved with in the decision-making process, I'd take it to the police myself.
Yes, although there is a lot of reasons why women would feel very reluctant to go to the police, especially given that the conviction rates for sexual assault are 0.6%, and you go through an enormous amount. Perhaps she went to the police as well. We don't know enough details about this. She may have gone to the police and also told the party. So it's not necessarily an either-or in this situation. We don't have the details.
But in those circumstances, any employer, I know that you don't exactly employ an MP, but take the point, any business or organisation is entitled to say, I'm going to see what happens with the police investigation. And we don't know whether the person took a complaint to the police. We don't know when it was either, but, we don't know whether this complaint was investigated by the police at all.
Yeah, OK. The other story on the front page of The Guardian there, right-hand column, bottom, former Post Office chair, I was the target of a smear campaign. Well, what an extraordinary session that was in Commons today.
Incredible. Someone was lying today. Someone was lying under oath because they said things that directly contradicted each other.
Well, did they? Anyway, carry on.
Well, they did. You have...
All just a big mistake.
Henry Staunton saying he's a victim of a stitch-up, and in fact this investigation was in fact into the Post Office CEO, Nick Reed, and he said he was perfectly happy in his job and had never wanted to leave, and according to Staunton...
He said he'd never offered his... Well, the statement tonight says he had never actually offered his resignation.
The issue is...
And the chair suggested that Nick Reed had privately said to him that he was thinking of quitting.
Yes.
So the two can be...
And the issue is this is about compensation for the postmasters, and again, the focus is no longer on them, it's on the infighting. And the postmasters who were interviewed throughout the day on Sky News and other outlets all seem to say that they believed Staunton and Staunton's account that their pay offer had been delayed. That was their experience.
It's natural and I've been involved in various campaigns and organisations, and I've seen plenty of them in business life too. It's natural for anyone, from patient groups to aggrieved to equitable life, to believe the worst thing about the people who are responsible.
Well, can you blame them
for something running them? Well, in this example, the point I was going to make was, in this example, I think, how would you feel if you were a postmaster or the descendant of a postmaster who's died before this has been fixed, hearing about Reed being paid a basic salary of $436k a year, hundreds of thousands on top of that in perks and top-ups, complaining about his salary too, and then the fallout is obviously between the chairman and the chief executive, more interested in bickering with each other than they were in seeking a resolution to this. The only thing I thought was quite amusing was the idea, a guy who comes out and says, the Secretary of State told me, in the most high-profile political environment of our time, right, 4-part documentary, dominates the headlines. That person told me to do something. I haven't got any evidence to turn out, but they told me to do something that was absolutely torpedoing for their politics. And I've been the subject of a smear campaign. Pull the other one.
Well, and you never know if the Nick Reed stuff was sort of dead cat diversion. Yeah. If so, it kind of worked, didn't it? The Sun front page, the BBC saying sorry to the family in related to the case of Hugh Edwards.
This is a profoundly disingenuous headline because it suggests that the BBC is saying sorry as a result of the allegations that were published in the Sun. And in fact, what the BBC are apologising for, there was an investigation that Deloitte undertook. They're apologising for their complaints procedure not being very good, that what happened was the family of this person in question went to complain at the headquarters in Cardiff of the BBC, and whilst the complaints were taken on board, they were not escalated quickly enough. This entire furore was avoidable. This family felt that they had been let down. They went to the Sun after they felt that the BBC had not taken their complaint seriously. That is what the BBC is is apologising for. You could walk past this newspaper in a newsagent and think that the BBC was apologising for the allegations that the Sun printed last summer, which they are not.
I'm a bit more sympathetic to the Sun, not least because it does say failures over complaint on the front page. But I take your
Right
point.
at the bottom,
It's not that small unless you really need glasses. But I take your point about the main headline saying what it says. But the point really is exactly as Jenny says in her summary, that if the BBC had taken this more... Unlike what we just discussed, there's no suggestion of criminality in this.
Yeah.
It was someone going to an organisation saying, could you please stop this man sending tens of thousands of pounds to my child to send them graphic images? Well, the BBC might have been entitled on one view to say, I don't think they would, take a libertarian laissez-faire attitude and say he can do what he likes, it's his private life. But the point was they basically ignored the story, didn't escalate it to senior execs.
They didn't escalate it, but you have to imagine how many people complain to the BBC, must complain to the BBC about high-profile figures all the time.
Like this, though?
Yes, I'm sure they do. I'm sure they do, and I'm sure some of those things are quite often made up.
I mean, that is the allegation, which seems to have not been fully investigated yet, because the BBC is suggesting that Hugh Edwards is not mentally fit yet enough to...
There's an internal HR investigation.
So that's all still underway, isn't it?
I was making the point that the organisations have slightly more to do in these environments, perversely, because there's no allegation of criminality. So it's not actually a matter for the police to investigate. There's not going to be a police investigation. So it is more upon the employer at that point.
Yeah. Got the Times in. You might have noticed we were missing a few papers as we read through them. Here we are. You've made your point. Now end the protest, says cleverly. The Home Secretary has told pro-Palestinian protesters to stop their regular rallies because they've made their point. Just quickly.
This is to do with the cost of policing these protests, which is apparently...
And the Lee Anderson fallout, you know.
And the Lee Anderson fallout, yes. I mean, the thing is, the cost shouldn't necessarily be a factor in all of this. The fact that a very large number of people are protesting suggests there's a large amount of public
and disruption
feeling.
to the capital, some have said.
Yes.
And...
I'm all in favour of peaceful protest. I'm not in favour of people stopping up the roads and making main termini for terminuses for trains being unusable, as being happening week after week in our capital.
OK, plenty more newspapers to come, including the headline from The Telegraph. UK blocks Macron's bid to send troops to Ukraine, discussing that summit after this. Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview. With me tonight, the journalist Jenny Kleeman and the PR consultant Alex Deane. Welcome back to both of you. The Daily Telegraph reports that the UK has blocked Macron's bid to send troops to Ukraine. So too have a number of other nations, including NATO itself. Yeah. So what was the French president doing as part of his summit? Well,
I think he was saying that sending troops on the ground is not to be ruled out. There are lots of, there are many different justifications for him saying that. Maybe he was trying to suggest that nothing is off the table. But we all know that Putin has said that as soon as there are EU, NATO boots on the ground, then it's a full-scale war. And, of course, everybody else is going to back away. But this is the sort of conversation that Ukraine wants us to be having. You have the US aid package stalled at the moment. Ukraine is stuck and something has to give. So whether or not this was a rhetorical device or a political device or a serious plan remains to be seen.
The relationship at the heart of the European Union normally sees France and Germany speaking very politely about one another and what they say, not on this occasion. The German position expressed by the Deputy Chancellor was immediately no chance, right? So we're very clear, right? That won't be happening. So it's interesting. Telegraph says UK blocks Macron's bid. FT says Berlin blocks Ukraine's bid. Depends on, he pays you money, he takes your choice. Yeah. Either way, there's no interest at the moment in the NATO alliance in making that conflict one that draws in NATO parties directly. But I think Macron's point is welcome, at least to one extent. We are currently failing Ukraine, and if you want Ukraine to do better, you've got to help them more. If that's the broader point, I think that's right. And the fact that it made Germany immediately say what we need to do is give more weapons instead, that is actually really quite welcome. So whilst Macron's position might have been a blundering one, it might have had a good outcome.
Got 1 minute left. Can we do two stories?
Sure.
I'm not sure. Anyway, Jenny, FT.
Yes.
The other one. Anyway, carry on.
That Thames Water customers of Thames Water are going to be delighted by this. Its collapse is imminent, apparently, and wants to be able to charge higher bills, lower fines, and want to pay more dividends. It's £18 billion in debt. I mean, you know, the mismanagement, the cheek of all of this, you know, privatisation of water companies has failed. There you go. I said that in about 10 seconds.
So straight to the wonkiest house. Or the wonkiest
Yeah,
pub.
thank God the people who took down the Crooked Well. Absolutely disgraceful that they knocked it down, and then there was a fire. What a bloody coincidence! They've been ordered They've been ordered to rebuild as it was and where it was. It's what the Italians do with opera houses when they burn down, and it's quite right we do it with the Crooked House.
But it's quite funny. How are they going to build it exactly as it was? I'd love to see the documentary about that. How to make it crooked.
Absolutely. Oh, should think about that one, shouldn't we? Jenny and Alex, thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
We'll see you for the 11. Here's the